Hello, I'm back. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel if you've seen my videos before. My name is Bryn. I am transgender and non-binary. I make videos about those topics. Today, I wanted to talk about transitioning as a non-binary person. It's gonna be more of an informational video rather than me sharing my experience, although I'm sure I'll find a way to talk about myself. I see a lot of, like, I guess, controversy or whatever in the trans community, and just people who don't necessarily know much about the trans community, and it's the debate, or whatever you want to call it, about if non-binary people are actually trans. So I'm kind of gonna get into it and all that kind of stuff, and if non-binary people and about non-binary people transitioning, all that kind of stuff. Alrighty, if you can hear the fans, because I just turned on the air conditioning because it's hot in here. To start off, if you don't know what non-binary is, that is a term used to describe people who don't identify solely with being a man or being a woman. It's an umbrella term, so there's a lot of different experiences under it. It basically encompasses a lot. And there's a bunch of other more or less vague labels, more specific, that's the word I was looking for, more specific labels that people sometimes use to describe themselves that fall under the non-binary umbrella, such as agender, gender fluid, lots of things. I'm not going to get into them all. But the question that I wanted to answer, or I guess talk about, is, are non-binary people trans, and do non-binary people transition? So under the definition, with non-binary people having a gender that is not solely the gender that they were assigned at birth, that is literally the definition of being trans. So when people hear transgender, a lot of people think, oh, male to female or female to male, and non-binary people are kind of left out of the question. But by definition, non-binary people are trans, but there are also a lot of non-binary people who don't feel comfortable using the trans label for different reasons, but I think a major reason is that trans is heavily centered around binary trans people, people who are transitioning from male to female or female to male, and because they're non-binary, they don't feel like they identify with that idea of what it means to be trans. So I would say, if you're ever confused, well, it probably doesn't even matter really, but if you're whatever, like, you can always ask questions like, do you identify as trans? And the next question that is a pretty common one that I see going around all the time is, do non-binary people transition? Or the idea that non-binary people don't transition. And not all non-binary people do, but many of them do, myself included. When it comes to transition, there's a lot of different aspects. I think people immediately, when they hear transition, they think of medical. They think of surgery, they think of hormones, things like that. And there are a lot of non-binary people that do take hormones. I myself am one of them. I've been on hormones almost 5 years. I will be making that video in the beginning of July about my 5 years on hormones, because that is when I started. So look forward to that. But I know a lot of people who transition who were assigned female at birth and take testosterone to transition. There's also this idea that if you are non-binary, that either you have to present androgynously, or that's like the assumption that you would want to. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of non-binary people who feel comfortable appearing feminine or appearing masculine, and that's what's most comfortable to them. You know, they might be masculine, but they don't identify with being a man, or they might be feminine, but they don't identify with being a woman, or they partially identify certain ways, like whatever. Like for myself, I can say that many times when it comes to romantic relationships with women, I feel not necessarily like a woman, but I am okay being categorized that way. Whereas in general life, I do not like being categorized that way. So, yeah. So also, when it comes to transition, it's not just hormones and it's not just surgeries. Those are ways that you can transition, but there's also socially transitioning, which would be things like pronouns are also they, them. And I changed my name when I came out as non-binary because I felt like the name that I was given when I was born was too masculine. It was a stereotypical male name, and I do not feel male at all. So I picked Bryn because that is, in my opinion, it is androgynous. It's a gender neutral name, but it tends to be more geared towards women, which is kind of where I fall on the spectrum. So I really liked the name, and that's what I chose. And I consider that a part of my transition, changing my name and my pronouns. And I think a lot of people would think that too. But when people hear the term transition, I think their brain a lot of the times jumps to medical transition. And while that can be a part of it, there are also many other ways to transition, as I just stated. Why would a non-binary person transition medically? You know, people might ask, well, Bryn, why are you taking estrogen if you're not a woman? That makes no sense. And for me, I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, but taking estrogen, getting surgery, like bottom surgery, stuff like that, while some people may view that as me becoming feminine, I feel like it's me unbecoming masculine. So I'm essentially demasculinizing my body, and to do that, I use feminine medicine, essentially, I guess. On top of that, I would much rather be viewed as a butch lesbian, or whatever you want to call this, rather than a feminine gay man. And so, and those, I mean that more in aesthetic, not necessarily orientation, just more in like the aesthetic that is associated with those two groups. And so for me, I feel really comfortable. For example, my hairline, it's not as masculine as it used to be, but I still look at it and it feels a little bit blocky, and I don't like that because to me that reads as masculine, and I'm not masculine. Also, I want to talk about non-binary dysphoria, which I probably should have talked about before I started talking about transition. And I guess I kind of dabbled in it a little bit already, but if you don't know what dysphoria is, or gender dysphoria, that's essentially feeling disconnected to your body or the social roles that you've been expected to play based on a gender that you are not. Most of the time based on your assigned sex at birth, but it can also be a different gender. For example, when if I had a big chest and stuff like that, I would feel dysphoric over it because I don't want that. I don't feel like that would be me. And I still consider that dysphoria, even though I was assigned male at birth, because I don't want to be a woman. I do not feel like I am a woman. So I get dysphoria from both ends of the spectrum. And I think a lot of non-binary people feel that way as well. Obviously not everybody. Everybody's experience is obviously different, just as any other category of people ever. But I think, from what I've seen through the comments here on YouTube, through what I've seen through the non-binary community around me, sometimes people feel they do want to find a balance between masculine and feminine. And again, that's not a requirement to be non-binary. People can be non-binary and feel comfortable being masculine, being feminine, being androgynous. But I'm just saying that I think it's a relatively common experience for non-binary people to sometimes essentially not want to pass as male or female. I like that when people see me, they're kind of like, but which one are you? Like, that's kind of the goal, because I don't want to be defined as a man and I don't want to be defined as a woman. So if people are looking at me and they're just like, but I don't really know, that's a compliment in my eyes. I don't want you to know. I don't want you to put me in those boxes. I do not fit in those boxes. Like, I don't want people to look at me and assume that I'm a woman or assume that I'm a man. I want them to look at me and see confusion, basically. And that's because I feel dysphoric when people think I'm a man or people think I'm a woman. I don't really experience dysphoria very much anymore when it comes to strangers thinking that, because in my head, most people, I feel like when you look at somebody, one of your first thoughts is like, was that a man or a woman? And nine times out of 10, you have an answer like that. And you know, there's certain things that you see that your brain automatically goes to and says that's a woman or that's a man, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And for myself, I feel like I do have aspects of both, probably. My voice is not the highest. It's probably a little bit low for my liking, but still. But for example, right now I'm wearing a backwards cap and I'm wearing jewelry. Those two things aren't things that typically fit one specific gender. The hat is probably regarded as more of a masculine thing, whereas the jewelry is considered probably more of a feminine thing, in general. But I like that I have this mixture, and that is because of my dysphoria. But on top of that, I feel like if I'm in the middle of Walmart, someone bumps into me and they're like, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry." Like, I think that they are maybe listening to my voice or seeing my hat and assuming I'm a man. Or if they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, miss," you know, I'm like, okay, well, they're looking at my face and my jewelry. And most of the time, the things that I feel like are defining me as a man or a woman to strangers are things that I have control over now. I used to get very dysphoric over being labeled as male or called he or sir or whatever, because that was before I transitioned at all, and I felt like the reason people were saying that was because I had these masculine features that I didn't ask for, because I wasn't on hormones, and I hadn't worked on my voice at all, and all this kind of stuff, and I felt like I was being defined by things that I didn't even have control over, and it was really just kind of devastating, I guess, or just like at least very, very frustrating. But now I feel like when people call me a guy, I mean, maybe I don't think people would really call me a guy when I'm dressed like this, but there's times where I don't really have that much jewelry or whatever, or I'm dressed kind of more masculine, like, and then people call me a guy, and I'm like, okay, but that's because that's how I choose to dress and I feel comfortable this way. So even though they're labeling that as male, they're still seeing me for me, I guess, even if they're using the wrong label, I think is what I'm trying to say. So I've talked about this, I think in one of my other videos, but there's social dysphoria and there's body dysphoria. Social dysphoria is based on the role that you have in society, in your relationships, in your friendships, in your family, all that kind of stuff. So that would be something like, I wouldn't feel comfortable if my sister was talking about me and she's like, "Oh, that's my brother." No, that gives me social dysphoria. Things like pronouns, being called he or she or whatever, things don't feel comfortable to you. Anything in that regard, so anything that has to do with interacting with people and being viewed as something that you are not regarding gender, that would be social dysphoria. Body dysphoria is when your body doesn't feel like home, essentially. It feels, or at least that's how I explain it. There may be other people that explain it differently, and I think it's up to interpretation because everyone feels differently, but it's essentially where your body doesn't match the way that you view yourself. So that could mean certain body parts. It could mean things like you feel like your body should be hairier, but it's not, because, you know, if a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth feels really dysphoric about having really smooth skin, they may take testosterone because then their hair grows more or whatever. Or things like, even like, I guess your voice could be body or social dysphoria. I don't really know. I think I consider that body dysphoria. It could be the length of your hair. It could be the way that your face is shaped. It could be so many different things, but it's where your body doesn't match the way that you view your gender. And I also do want to talk about gender euphoria, which is the opposite. It's something that I didn't even really think about, but I heard about it a few years ago from, I think it was I think he's a trans guy. I'm pretty sure. And he's on YouTube. If I can find him, I'll link him below. I'm hoping I'm using the right pronouns. If not, I will correct it in the box below. But his name's Aaron, I think. But anyways, he was saying that when he was a child or a teenager or something, there was once where, and this is like before transition, he was like in a line at a grocery store and someone gendered him as sir or he or something like that, and he said that he felt so amazing and like he had never really experienced dysphoria over being considered female, but he experienced a lot of euphoria over being considered male. And I think that that's a really interesting take, because it wasn't something that I really thought about, but I've seen more and more posts pop up about it recently, and I think that that's a really important thing to put, because I think there's a lot of people who, there's all this, as we call it, gatekeeping in the trans community. Like, if you don't take hormones, you're not really trans. If you don't do this, you're not really trans, and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things is, if you don't have dysphoria, then you're not really trans. But like I said, there's different types of dysphoria, and usually when people say if you don't have dysphoria, you're not trans, they're referring to body dysphoria. But there are a lot of people who experience social dysphoria, but not body dysphoria. And then there's also the idea, which I really like, that even if you don't experience dysphoria over being perceived as your assigned sex at birth or whatever, you experience euphoria being perceived as a different gender. And I think that that's a really powerful thing, because I think I have experienced both. I experienced dysphoria over things that aren't me, and I experienced euphoria over things that are me. And I wish that that topic was talked about more, because I think it plays a really big part in transition and being trans and all this kind of stuff, and it's just kind of swept under the rug. It's not really thought about much. But I think if you're trying to figure out if you're non-binary or trans or whatever, and you're not necessarily feeling terrible about the way that you look now or whatever, but when you think about yourself as a woman or as a man or as a non-binary person, whatever, and you're like, oh, like, that's great. Like, I think that that's important, and I think that that's enough of a reason to transition. I think the narrative that we see a lot is that trans people hate their bodies, and they have to transition, or they feel like they're gonna die if they don't. And while that is a very valid reason to transition and a very valid experience to have, that's not the experience that everyone has. I had dysphoria before I came out and before I transitioned, and I didn't know that I had it. I remember I felt a little bit weird when I looked at my body, but I didn't really know why, and I didn't correlate it to being a guy. I just felt weird. And it wasn't until I started transitioning medically that I started realizing, oh, that's what all my dysphoria was. I had much more social dysphoria than I ever had over body dysphoria. But now, if I ever had to detransition medically, not go over well, because I feel very euphoric in the way that I look, and the way that I sound, and the way that I dress, and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And I wish that that topic was talked about more and was kind of like, I guess, general knowledge. So that's part of the reason I'm putting it in this video, but also just because I think it's important. I guess, I don't think I have a whole lot more to say, but I think what I want to remind everybody watching this video, whether you're trans or not, or non-binary or not, one, it's up to you what labels you want to use. You never have to use the trans label if you don't feel comfortable. But it's also, I think it's important to keep in mind that you don't get to define somebody else's experience. And that being trans or being non-binary or both, there is a wide variety of experiences. And if you're ever feeling like I'm not trans enough, that's a common thing that I hear from a lot of non-binary people. Just know that you are. And there's no set of requirements like that you have to do this in order to transition or whatever. You just need to do what makes you feel the most comfortable in your body and what makes you the most comfortable in the social roles that you play in the world. And if that means changing your pronouns, then change your pronouns. If that means going on hormones, then go on hormones. If that means literally just cutting your hair and dressing, you know, in boys' clothes instead of girls' clothes, then do it. Like, it doesn't, it makes me really frustrated when people use the idea that oh, well, if you do this and you're not the same as me, it makes me look bad. The issue, if someone says, like, okay, so, sorry, last tangent, but if I'm friends with another non-binary person who has not medically transitioned at all, has not changed their name, has not changed their pronouns, but they know that they're non-binary, if people aren't respecting me because they're not respecting them, because they're not transitioning in the way that they're supposed to, the problem isn't them. The problem is the people who are not respecting me or not respecting them. And I don't like when the blame is put on other people who are also like, you know, they are marginalized as well, or we're in the same group. The issue is not my friend who hasn't transitioned. The issue is the person who is choosing to disrespect an entire group of people because they don't like the way that one person did it. The issue is the person who is not respecting the people. Not the people because they're not doing enough to deserve respect and they're making the rest of the community look bad. They're not. People can have different experiences and it's not a threat on you. And if it is, then you need to, like, I don't even know what to say. It shouldn't be a threat on you. And the argument shouldn't be between the people who transition and the people who don't. It should be the people who are marginalized, who are being treated poorly, coming together against the people who are treating them poorly. So I think, to me, that's pretty obvious, but not obvious to everybody, I guess, so. But I think that's everything, so thank you for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day, or night, or week, or month, or life, you know, whatever. But I'm gonna go, so see ya.